In the spring of 1975, executive producer Aaron Spelling walked his new leading man out to a studio parking lot to introduce him to his co-star. The co-star was a car, a bright red Ford Gran Torino with an enormous white stripe sweeping over the roof and down both sides. The actor, Paul Michael Glaser, took one look at the machine he would be driving for the next 4 years and delivered his verdict on the spot. He said it looked like a striped tomato. He meant it as an insult. The writers overheard it, loved it, and wrote it into the scripts. The insult became the car's official nickname. The car became the third star of the show. And 1 year later, Ford was building factory replicas of the car its own leading man despised. 1,305 of them, because the American public could not get enough of the striped tomato. This is the story of the most successful car an actor ever hated. Here is what makes the Starsky and Hutch Gran Torino different from every other car in this series. It was not designed by a famous Hollywood customizer. There was no Barris shop, no Dean Jeffries, no fabrication studio. The most recognizable paint scheme of 1970s television was designed by a man almost nobody has ever heard of. A studio transportation coordinator named George Grenier, whose job was moving vehicles around a production lot. Grenier picked the car off a lease list. Grenier designed the white vector stripe. And Grenier did it not because anyone asked for an icon, but because the producers needed a car that would read clearly on camera during high-speed chase scenes. The striped tomato is what happens when a working transportation man solves a practical television problem and accidentally creates one of the most replicated vehicles in American pop culture. Stay with me. Every beat of this story is an accident that worked. Start with the car that was supposed to exist instead. Series creator William Blinn wrote Starsky and Hutch with a specific vehicle in mind: a green and white Chevrolet Camaro. Blinn had owned one himself, and he loved it. In his conception, Detective Dave Starsky drove a Camaro. That was the plan on paper. The plan died for the least glamorous reason in Hollywood: fleet logistics. Spelling Goldberg Productions, the studio behind the show, sourced its vehicles through the Ford Motor Company's Studio TV car loan program, an arrangement where Ford supplied lease vehicles to television productions in exchange for the exposure. The studio had a Ford deal. Therefore, the detectives would drive a Ford. Blinn's Camaro was dead before a single frame was shot, killed by a supplier contract. That decision landed on the desk of the show's transportation coordinator, George Grenier. His assignment? Find something in Ford's lease stock that could star in a cop show. What Ford had available was the Gran Torino, a heavy, mid-sized, family-oriented coupe. Not a muscle car, not a police interceptor. A commuter car with a big engine option. Grenier selected two 1975 Gran Torino two-door hardtops in Ford's factory bright red, paint code 2B, and set about turning a family car into a television star. The producers gave Grenier one creative requirement: the car had to stand out. It had to be instantly recognizable in a high-speed pursuit, unmistakable in a crowded street scene, and memorable to a viewer flipping between 3 channels. A plain red car wasn't enough. Grenier's answer was the vector stripe, a massive white swoosh that starts low behind the front wheel, sweeps upward across the door, runs over the roof, and tapers down the rear quarter panel. The first cars were delivered from Ford in pure red, and the stripes were painted on afterward. It was a transportation coordinator's solution: bold, cheap, and readable at any camera distance. Then came the stance. The crew fitted rear air shocks to lift the tail and give the car its aggressive nose-down rake, and, more practically, to handle the abuse of stunt driving. The steel wheels were replaced with 15-inch Anson Sprint 5-slot aluminum alloys, wearing larger rear tires. None of this was styling for styling's sake. Every change made the car more visible, more durable, or more capable on camera. The result was a machine that looked like nothing else on television. A family coupe, dressed like a street racer, designed by a man whose name never appeared in a single episode's opening credits. The visual identity of the entire show was set by the transportation department. And then, the leading man saw it. Paul Michael Glaser was a New York stage actor, serious about his craft, and, by his own account, not a fan of Ford products in general. When Aaron Spelling walked him out to meet the Gran Torino, Glaser's reaction was immediate and unfiltered. The car was big. It was garish. It was, in his words, a striped tomato. He also raised an objection that, frankly, was completely correct. Starsky and Hutch were supposed to be undercover detectives. Undercover cops do not drive a bright red car with a giant white stripe. The vehicle was the single most conspicuous machine in any scene it appeared in. As police procedure, it was absurd. As television, it was perfect. And television won. What happened next is the detail that makes this story special. The writers did not defend the car. They did not quietly ignore the star's complaint. They took Glaser's insult and wrote it into the show. On screen, Hutch mocks the car. The nickname Striped Tomato entered the scripts as dialogue, spoken by the characters themselves. The show turned its own leading man's contempt into a running joke, and in doing so, gave the car a personality. Audiences didn't just recognize the Torino, they were in on the joke about it. Glaser's relationship with the car never warmed much. For 4 seasons, the man behind the wheel of one of television's most beloved vehicles remained one of its least enthusiastic passengers. It did not matter. By the end of season 1, the Gran Torino was receiving fan mail. Now the part of the story the cameras never showed. The striped tomato that audiences watched screaming through the streets of Bay City, sliding around corners, launching off hills, chasing down criminals, was hiding a mechanical secret that borders on comedy. The show ran the cars hard, and the production modified them to fake performance the stock Torino didn't have. The pilot cars were powered by the 351 Windsor V8. The first season cars came equipped with the 400 engine. In later seasons, they used the larger 460 Lima V8. However, the most critical modification was made to the rear axle. The production team replaced the factory highway gearing with a much higher gear ratio, one designed for rapid acceleration off the line, allowing the heavy Torino to leap forward the moment the director called action. The trade-off was severe. High acceleration gearing means the engine spins dramatically faster at any given road speed. Push the car too fast, and the engine would over-rev itself toward destruction. The production's solution was a label. By the second season, a printed warning was fixed to the dashboard of the star car, in full view of the actors, reading, "Do not exceed 50 miles per hour." Sit with that. The most famous chase car on American television, the machine an entire generation of viewers believed was the fastest thing in Bay City, carried a factory-style warning label telling its drivers to keep it under 50. The speed was a camera trick. The gearing made the car look explosive in the first 100 feet, and clever editing did the rest. Television's greatest pursuit vehicle spent 4 seasons legally unfit for the freeway. By early 1976, something unprecedented was happening at Ford dealerships. Customers were walking in and asking for the Starsky and Hutch car, not a red Torino. The Torino, stripe and all. Ford noticed, and in March of 1976, at the company's Chicago manufacturing plant, Ford did something it had essentially never done before. It put a television prop into factory production. The Starsky and Hutch limited edition Gran Torino was a real, orderable showroom car. The same bright red paint, the same white vector stripe, applied on the assembly line. The details of the program reveal how unusual it was. Ford had actually discontinued bright red as a Torino color for 1976, so the paint itself was exclusive to this edition, a 1-year revival for a TV tie-in. The package required the deluxe bumper group and color-keyed mirrors. Buyers could order it with the 351 Windsor, the 400, or the big 460 V8. The factory cars skipped the show cars' air shocks and slotted mags. Those were stunt equipment, not showroom equipment. But from the curb, the replica was unmistakable. Ford built 1,305 of them. One of those factory replicas was even pulled into service as a backup car on the show itself. A copy of the prop, working alongside the prop it copied. Today, authenticated examples of the 1976 factory edition are collector vehicles, verified by their district sales office codes and hunted by Torino enthusiasts, precisely because Ford never did anything quite like it again. Think about what that production run represents. A car chosen off a lease list, striped by a transportation coordinator, and mocked by its own driver, had become so popular that America's second-largest automaker retooled a paint program to sell copies of it. The insult was now an assembly line. The show ended in 1979, after 4 seasons and 92 episodes. The lease cars went back into the studio system, and the surviving screen cars scattered into private hands, where authenticated examples now trade as blue-chip television artifacts. But the striped tomato refused to stay retired. In 2004, the feature film remake with Ben Stiller and Owen Wilson brought the car back, and the resurrection required a fabrication effort the original show never had. With the original cars unavailable, Mike Walsh's Premier Studio Rentals built 9 new Torinos for the film, including 2 hero cars for the actors, working from an original Ford factory replica and archival footage of the show. This time, the performance was real. The stock engines were swapped for 360 cubic-inch Windsors, tuned to 435 horsepower, running 0 to 60 in 5.6 seconds. The 2004 cars could finally do what the 1975 cars only pretended to, and the factory replicas kept appreciating. Barn find examples of the 1305 car edition still surface, dusty, forgotten, and suddenly valuable the moment the paperwork checks out. A car Ford built as a marketing novelty has become one of the most sought-after limited editions of the entire 1970s Torino line. George Grenier's name, meanwhile, remains almost entirely unknown. The man who selected the car and designed the most famous stripe in television history was a transportation coordinator doing his job. No customizer's badge on the fender, no promotional tour, no legend built around his shop. Just a paint scheme that outlived the show, the remake, and every car it was ever applied to. That is what makes the striped tomato worth telling in this series. Every other car we've covered was built by a craftsman fighting for recognition. Dean Jeffries, Michael Sheffey, the fabrication crews of Chicago. The Gran Torino is the opposite case, an icon nobody meant to create. A studio contract killed the Camaro. A transportation coordinator painted a stripe. A star's insult became a nickname. A warning label kept the whole thing under 50 miles an hour. And Ford sold 1,305 copies of the accident. Sometimes the builder is a famous customizer. Sometimes the builder is a man with a lease list and a paint idea. ReelIron presents The Builders exists to credit them both. If you watch this channel because you want the real production story instead of the marketing version, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. Drop a comment with the builder, customizer, or car you want investigated next. I read every single one. Thanks for riding along. I'll see you in the next one.